is that nonverbal does not mean non-intelligent. It doesn't mean non-thinking. It doesn't mean not feeling. It doesn't, even if they don't appear to be paying attention or tuned into their world, our world at all, that
Right.
they are hearing everything and they do understand everything. And
Sure.
beyond that, they are exhibiting some special capabilities that we're going to talk about today.
Welcome everyone to the Grow Podcast. I'm Ashley and this is Wendy. How are you today?
I am doing great. So what are we talking about today, Miss Ashley?
We are talking with, I think you interviewed Jana and you guys talked about cannabis and autism. Is that correct?
Yeah. I interviewed Janna Champagne and we talked about autism, cannabis, and spirituality, which is a pretty deep topic. And there are many people who really feel like autistic people are here for a very divine purpose and have much more access to their higher selves. It's a really provocative topic.
Yeah, it is really interesting. And, I've never worked very closely, but I do have people that I love that fall into the autistic spectrum. And I have found them to be the most amazing humans that I have ever met. So I would not be surprised that they have some sort of divine purpose.
Yeah, I agree. And the spectrum is pretty wide, I think. And I think, one striking thing that you'll find in this interview is really that we talk about this young boy named Jacob, and we also talk a bit about Jana's daughter, who's on the spectrum. And both have brought so much and taught so much to the people around them. And the striking part really is that in both of these cases, especially, and I hope that it happens often, the parents really listened to what the children had to say and figured out how to communicate with them rather than what happens in school often, which is trying to get them to communicate in the way that we all communicate. So I think we have something really special going on, and I think everyone will really enjoy the interview.
Yes, I'm so excited to listen.
Hey there, Wendy Jo with the Grow Podcast. Well, I've met many people in my life who have suffered in life, who have suffered abuse, illness, neglect, poverty. Frequently, they find their spiritual path, and as they do, their gifts emerge very strongly. And so, if there's any silver lining to these difficulties that we endure as humans, one of them is that it can really help you to find your spiritual path, find your spiritual gifts, and become not only self-reliant to heal yourself, but also heal others. Hey there, friends. Wendy Jo from the Grow Podcast. I am super excited today because I am introducing you to Synergy Skinworks, your trusted source for medicinal cannabis patches. That's right, a transdermal system for cannabis medicine. And it doesn't matter where you place it on your body because the medicine goes where the blood flows. It's 97% bioavailable in this form, and the patch won't move if you sweat or get it wet. They are available in all 38 dispensaries in Arkansas and also in Oregon and Montana, and I just know they're going to be available all across the country because it is brilliant. As a patient, I find them to be discreet, easy to use, and I can place it and forget about it for 24 hours. As a health professional, I love it that patients can give their lungs a break. If you'd like, you can learn more at synergyskinworks.com. And I've got my patch on. Peace out. Joining me now is Janna Champagne, herbalist, retired nurse, and medical cannabis expert. Welcome to the Grow Podcast, the season of love. Jana, nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Wendy, again. I know we've done this a few times and I'm just so excited to be back. So thanks for having me.
Yes, and I thought as I think about you and our season of love and combining spirituality and healthcare, I can't help but think of you.
Aw.
Um, so, welcome. And today we're going to talk about autism, spirituality, and probably a little bit about God also. It's really provocative subjects. Um, so, first, I know that you've said that having a special needs child really led you to your own spiritual evolution. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Course. And so I have a 21-year-old daughter with autism, and she's sort of in a moderate phase. She started off very severe, and we did a whole lot of work to really try to maximize her potential and help her be her best self over the years. And so that is reflected in her ability to speak, which came at about 10 years of age. Her academic and intelligent abilities, which came even after that. To kind of put it in perspective, she was labeled mentally retarded in second grade, and we were told she was unable to learn, and they wanted to put her in a classroom with no academic focus. And at that point, we fired everybody and started homeschooling, and she graduated with a high school diploma in 2021 as a fifth year senior. So,
Congratulations to
yeah,
her and
it's
to
been
you.
a journey.
As a parent, you really have to kind of push the envelope. You know, they sort of want to put kids in with different labels in specific situations. And don't you think every child is an individual?
Absolutely. In fact, I say I have a daughter with special needs, but the truth is that every child has their own special needs. Every child is unique. And with autism, the needs tend to be more profound. And for example, my daughter will likely require lifelong care. And because she still has a lot of executive function challenges and difficulties being independent and taking care of herself. So these are still big issues for her, even though intelligently she's very brilliant, and this is something that we're learning about kids with autism, and even those, especially those that have verbal difficulties and aren't able to communicate effectively. Sometimes they're written off as being non-intelligent or not having any kind of function that way. And what we're really learning, and we're going to talk about Jacob today too, another little boy with autism, is that nonverbal does not mean non-intelligent. It doesn't mean non-thinking. It doesn't mean not feeling. It doesn't, even if they don't appear to be paying attention or tuned into their world, our world at all, that
Right.
they are hearing everything and they do understand everything. And
Sure.
beyond that, they are exhibiting some special capabilities that we're going to talk about today. And so I think it's just so exciting, those of us that are open to the message that these children are bringing us are just getting blown away with this information, like, wow, this is amazing. And we still know so little, we still have so much to learn.
For sure. Yeah, we're going to talk about Jacob and his story in just a moment, which just blew me away.
Mm-hmm.
But just digging a little deeper for you, did it kind of push you into a spiritual transformation, or do you feel like it kind of opened your mind? What was it that really pulled you into spiritual growth?
Yes, and at the time that my daughter was diagnosed, I mean, I grew up in a very religious family, sort of, anti-spirituality in my opinion, just the way things were handled and the way things were broached. It was very ego driven and very identity driven. There wasn't a lot of genuine belief that was exemplified for me as a child. So I saw the hypocrisy of that very early on and never really felt accepted or like I fit in. I felt very judged. And I even go so far as to say I have religious PTSD
Mhm.
from when
You're
I
not
became,
alone with that.
yeah, it's prevalent. And people think, oh, how could that be? But it really is traumatic, some of the things that I experienced,
I'm so
the
sorry.
lack of acceptance and even being looked down upon because I didn't share the same sentiments or the same gifts that others in the church were receiving. And an example of that would be when I was 13 years old and I got in trouble. And my parents' response was to send me to an ultra religious high school.
Hmm.
And it was Pentecostal, I think, or something similar, almost borderline cult.
Mhm.
And my first day in chapel, everybody was speaking in tongues and undulating and doing all these crazy things. And I was looked down upon for not having these gifts. And it was so frightening to me. It shook me to
Uh,
my core, like, what have I gotten myself into this
right.
time?
Yeah, it must have been frightening. And, just feeling like an outsider and not realizing that the very things that make you an outsider make you really special. I think in those situations, because they want, again, just like in the schools, they want to put you in a box and say everyone is the same, but we are absolutely not. So it sounds like having your daughter really helped you to understand yourself a little more and what you had that was special.
Definitely. The spiritual growth came a little bit later as I began to separate spirituality from religion
Mhm.
was an important aspect of that. And once I moved out of my parents' house at 18, I started to really kind of find myself and what are my beliefs and what, and my answer was that I just need to explore. I don't know anything else except for what I was taught.
Right.
And early or late teens, early 20s, I connected with a coworker of mine who happened to be a Reiki practitioner,
Oh,
and she started doing Reiki work on me at work. And then we went into private sessions and I eventually became a Reiki practitioner. So I did kind of start down that more spiritual pathway. It awakened to me that there's this thing called energy and that it flows through us and around us and connects everything. And then I became a massage therapist. So I was definitely kind of going down that path.
mhm,
And then I met my daughter's father, and he was not receptive to any of that. So I just kind of like put it aside.
mhm.
He had two boys, so I had instant family, and then my daughter came along, and so at that time I was still kind of blocked off to all of that, thinking it just wasn't important. It wasn't something I pursued. But as she evolved, she opened me up to some very different perspectives.
Mm,
When she was very young, I got some very clear indications that she had special abilities, like telepathy is one of them,
mhm.
where I would think something and she would respond. And it happened so many times. I got to where if I didn't want her to hear something, I would think, I'm not going to think it. I'm not going to think it. I'm not going to think it.
Right, right. That can be really difficult. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love it that you recognize that in her.
Mhm.
And it seems like with Jacob, the story that you sent me in preparation for this interview, his parents were able to recognize his gifts as well. So if you could sort of, for our listeners and viewers, tell Jacob's story just a bit and the spiritual component of it, I think it's really so interesting and something people need to know.
Yes, of course. And so my daughter is 21. She's a bit older than Jacob. And it took us until she was 10 or 11 years old to realize that she had spelling capabilities and that she could type to communicate. And that just opened up
Oh,
our knowledge of her world. And we're finding that nowadays parents are teaching their kids to type much earlier in age. And it starts with a spelling board, and they'll use a pen and a spelling board and point to communicate. And then that leads to typing. And so Jacob's parents had been teaching him how to type and teaching him how to communicate that way. And they were very intrigued. So they were constantly asking him questions and pushing him and getting him to practice that typing. And through those interactions, at one, he was struggling with anxiety, I believe it was, and struggling at school because of the anxiety. And they took him to a doctor, and they came home with a pharmaceutical medication. And mom said for the first time, I asked him, like, what do you think of trying this? And his response was, I would rather try cannabis. Now, this is an 8-year-old boy in Georgia. Parents have never touched cannabis, know nothing about it. They were surprised that he even knew what it was. And
and
so
he
they
used the
started,
word cannabis. He didn't say marijuana, which he might have heard, in passing somewhere. So that is just so cool. Do you think that that was channeled to him?
My perception after hearing the whole story is that some of these kids with autism, and we know they have these special abilities, like my daughter and her telepathy.
Mhm.
Some of these kids are connected in, I believe, to collective knowledge, like they're tapped in somehow. And it was through him asking for cannabis that the family found me, and we got him on the cannabis therapy, and it helped him enormously with his function. Where the story kind of deepens is where they asked him, do you know the cure for autism? And his answer was yes, the cure is something called SOS. And they sent that to me and said, now we know you're into the nutrigenomics and the chemical cycles. Have you ever heard of such a thing? I didn't know. They said they asked like a dozen other doctors, and came up with no answers whatsoever, and kind of blew it off before they even brought it to me. And so when they brought it to me, I thought, I have no clue. I kind of Googled it and didn't see anything. So I sent it to a physician who I collaborate with, Dr. Christian Bogner. He's a functional physician in Michigan, and he's also an autism dad. And so he's done an enormous amount of research on autism and the contributors and the potential biomedical treatments. And so I forwarded it to him, and he wrote back and he said, you know what, I think I might know what he's talking about. I really need to connect with this family. So they all connected, and the rest is kind of history. But basically, this little boy taught Dr. Bogner some really vital information that has turned into a treatment for autism that is helping a lot of kiddos.
Absolutely amazing. I mean, here's this child who is not, nonverbal, and I understand, he even had times where he was aggressive and just, it was hard to manage, and the school kind of didn't have anything for him. But I think with the parents being so persistent and just really, listening to him, all the right ingredients were there for some successes for him. And, in watching the story, I just kept thinking, gosh, I mean, other parents may not have even helped him to come out in that way, or to show what he had. So, they are just inspirational and amazing. But that he has this knowledge, and in the story, I heard them say that they asked him where he heard about this, and he said, I heard it from God.
Yep. He says he talks to God. When asked what his IQ level was, it was 500 something, if I recall.
Yes.
So this brilliant little boy that is just trapped in his own body, that is unable to communicate the way that everybody surrounding him does. It's fascinating that he was able to break through that barrier with the help of his parents. And it really does speak to the tenacity of autism parents. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason it's so amazing that they were so persistent and kept pushing and kept asking is because I mean, I can't tell you the number of times that I've taken my daughter to an expert and had them look me right in the face and say, there's nothing to do here. Just let it be. Just
yeah.
let it what it is, and accept it. And not that there's anything wrong with accepting where our kids are. I think that's an important piece. The denial is not helpful. You need to accept, but you also need to be receptive to potential answers to help them. Mm-hmm. And if instinctually something is a fit, or you think it might be a fit for your kid, explore it. Don't listen to an expert that's just saying, don't do anything, accept your child. You can accept your child and help them be their best self and help them meet their full potential. And the acceptance comes in the surrender of whatever that might be, whatever their full potential might be, you surrender to that. So in seeking answers to help me help her live her best life and meet her full potential, I've actually looked at things like astrology and human design to help explain them. Nice. And human design in particular has a really interesting perception of autism and how that will be evolving further in the future to bring in a new generation of humans. And it's through human design. They call those with autism well, my daughter was called a rave hybrid, like she's part rave. And rave is their acronym for Rays of Love.
Uh,
And her Human Design and the Book of One, by Ra, in 2027, we're going to see a huge influx of the raves, and they're going to start to come in as the evolved humans. And they may be perceived as extraordinarily disabled, but it's kind of like autism where we don't necessarily see their gifts. They're not super obvious. We have to do some investigating and some, really working with them to bridge the gap between our abilities as the old type of human and their abilities as these newer humans. And there's a fascinating podcast on this subject by Earth Ascending. His name is Dylan, and I can't think of his last name right now, but he's the one that read my chart and my daughter's chart, told me all of this. And his first podcast, the number one podcast by Earth Ascending, is about the incoming raves. So if that resonates with you, that's a great resource to learn more.
So you're thinking this is divinely inspired and all in perfect order. Thank you for mentioning that other podcast. We'll have to take a look at that as well. So you briefly touched on cannabis for autism, and this seems to have helped your daughter and Jacob. How does that work? And is that something people could look into for their own children or themselves?
Yes, I highly recommend it. So as a retired nurse and an herbalist, I've worked with cannabis patients, thousands of them. I've been in the cannabis industry nearly a decade now, and I've seen so many beneficial health outcomes, and especially for chronic conditions where there really aren't a lot of good options in the pharmaceutical or the mainstream world. And autism,
got a lot of side effects and interactions, right?
Right. Polypharmacy is a sure way for somebody to impair their quality of life and their function. And what we see is that when people start cannabis therapy, they reduce their reliance on pharmaceuticals, sometimes weaning completely. I know I did. And they have better quality of life and better function, as with a really solid medical approach. That is totally expected for patients. As medical professionals, we've taken an oath to do no harm. And so harm reduction should naturally be our primary inclination. And we just don't see a lot of the objective weighing of risk versus benefit that includes cannabis therapy as an option. And the reason for that is that we're just not educating our medical professionals. We actually omit a major bodily system in the anatomy courses in medical and nursing schools.
Yeah, and in therapy schools, it's not available, and we can't even talk about it with our patients in most settings. So hopefully, the change continues, and of course, the spiritual connection to cannabis is known by most people in the space. In ancient China, it was used for so many conditions and in spiritual practice in so many cultures. And still here we are in the US where they still say no medicinal value. It's insane.
Yeah, while the same government holds patents for cannabis specific to its medicinal uses. So it's, once again, complete hypocrisy. It's all very profit driven, which is the opposite of our medical ethics, which mandate that we follow patient needs first and foremost.
Right, for sure.
So when we look at it that way, it's a breach in our ethics. And that's a great way to actually kind of crack open the paradigm of mainstream medical professionals who are scared to death to even hear the word cannabis, much less talk about it because it's Schedule I placed. And so federally, it's still illegal. The fact that they didn't learn about the endocannabinoid system in medical school, so they don't understand that it's the motherboard of our body and that we create cannabinoids that are synonymous with those that we can supplement from the plant when we're lacking, and that the impact of those cannabinoids is systemic homeostasis. So endocannabinoid system governs every other system of the body and keeps it in balance. And so when you understand that the underlying cause of all illness is imbalances, and cannabis addresses that, it explains how it's good for so many things, where a lot of physicians will say, oh, it must be snake oil, it's good for everything, and we're supposed to be discriminating. So I get that. Right. It's really that we've done a disservice to our medical professionals by not educating them properly on this topic.
Agreed. And then we have kids like Jacob telling us straight up, God told me cannabis is going to help me. And so I think, what you're talking about, this influx of a different human design coming, I look forward to it. Maybe it's this new generation that's going to help us continue to move forward. But this has been such a lovely discussion, and you have so much to offer. How can people get in touch with you?
Probably the best way is my Media Kit website, which is jannachampagne.com, Janna, and then champagne like the drink. And it has links to kind of all of my roles and what I do. There's also articles on there, and one of them, specifically if you're interested in learning more about the science supporting cannabis for autism, I have an article called Cannabis for Autism Harm Reduction that cites a bunch of the research that's supporting, including that, autism is linked with endocannabinoid deficiency, which I was talking about. These kids can't make enough internal cannabinoids. So when we supplement with cannabinoids from the plant, we're actually giving their body a way to fill in that deficiency and help bring their body into balance. So it's just, not to mention that it's amazing for the symptoms, anxiety and insomnia and behavior calming. And also, these kids have what I would consider like holes in their sensory filter. And THC especially seems adept at helping to fill those in a little bit. So they're not just, there isn't this onslaught of sensory input like we see so often.
Wow, sounds just perfect for that diagnosis. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the Grow podcast. Take care, Jana.
For having me, Wendy.
Hey there, Wendy Jo, co-host of the Grow podcast. Also, Wendy Edge, occupational therapist. And I wanted to tell you about my new business where I'm combining the principles of occupational therapy, coaching, and spirituality, and wellness, of course. On the website, you'll see that I'm doing Osho Zen card readings, spiritual coaching, spirit paintings, and so much more. So if you want, check it out, edgecoachingandconsulting.com.
Have you heard of the Cannabis Nursing School? It's a place where cannabis nursing, entrepreneurship, and spirituality meet. The Highline Tribe is waiting for you, and it's so easy to find. CannabisNursingSchool.com.
Well, that was a really great interview, wasn't it?
It really was. So, it was really interesting that even though the patient, what was his name? Jacob,
yes.
Jacob was nonverbal, and to be able to eventually communicate about cannabis being able to help him, that was mind blowing.
To me, it's confirmation. I mean, there was no way he could have, just come up with that on his own, and that and the SOS, and when he said, God told him so matter-of-factly, it just really filled my heart. And I really feel like children just say things the way it is, right? Matter-of-factly, this is what's going on, and it's such a beautiful thing.
Yeah, they don't question it. I mean, I think so many of us just get in our heads about what's right and what's wrong, and whatever. I don't want to look bad, those kind of things, and I don't think they have that social pressure to worry about, to just be able to say what comes. And I think that's why spirit can talk to them, to be honest with you. So I don't know.
Yes, and so I hope everyone else found the information uplifting and informative, and we hope you have a great week. Bye.
Bye.